In 2014, a young man by the name of Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri by a law enforcement officer. Since his death, Democratic politicians, mainstream media outlets, and BLM have been pushing a narrative that law enforcement officers are unjustly killing innocent black men in the streets. Is it true? Let's talk about it. In order to find out if innocent black people are just being gunned down by law enforcement, we have to first find out how many people were actually killed by law enforcement and why. There's a few websites that I like to use when gathering my data. The most prominent being a website called Mapping Police Violence. Also Statistica, which uses the FBI website, the CDC, Bureau of Justice, just to name a few. The reason why I like to use multiple sites is because no one has come up with a system to get the exact numbers of these things yet. Mapping police violence is one of the most comprehensive at doing so. They also are very thorough in their investigations and provide names. They have found that 1,127 people were killed by the police in 2020. Shooting accounted for 96% of those deaths. Tasing, physical force, and also vehicles accounted for the rest of those deaths. Out of the 1,127 killings, police officers were only charged in 16 cases. Why is that? That doesn't sound right. It almost sounds like the system is rigged, right? But that's when you don't account for how many of those killings were ruled justified. I think it's also important that I mention, out of those 16 cases, only 8 of them had either body cam footage or video evidence. So now we have to break that number down even further. Out of that 1,127 killings, how many of them would actually be just or justified? The number is 80. 80 of those 1,127 cases could be called into question. Why? Because the ones who were shot were considered unarmed, in most cases, not a threat. That still seems high. 80 people, that's way too many, but we can break that down even further. Now we get into what's called per capita, or by head. So we know that white people account for about 63% of the entire population. Black people make up about 13% of the entire population. The Hispanic community makes up for about 17% of the population, and the rest is made of people who are either unknown, Pacific Islander, or Asian. In this video, we're going to concentrate primarily on the black community. Out of the 80 people who were killed, 27 were black, 15 were Hispanic, I think it was one was Native American, 2 were Pacific Islander, and 31 were white, 4 were unknown. But wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. If black people only make up 13% of the entire population, white people make up another 63% of the entire population, but only 31 white people were killed, but 27 black people were killed? That really does sound like more black people per capita are being slaughtered in the streets. Why is that? This is when lazy math comes to play, or when you try to push a narrative. Now, I could leave it there and it would just sound absolutely terrible, but I'm the skeptical type. When someone tells me something, I don't just immediately believe it, especially when it comes from mainstream media. Why is usually the first question in my head. Why did this happen? So I decided to go a little further, break down those 27 innocent black people, and find out what happened. Now, out of those 27 who were killed by the police, there are only a few names that I can say should definitely not have died. That was William Green, the officer was charged. Andre Hill, officer was charged. Anthony Jones, 2 officers were charged. Breonna Taylor, officer was charged. Tommy McLaughlin, 4 officers were charged. Joel Acevedo, officer was charged. Michael Blue Thomas, Still under investigation. Officers awaiting charges. And that's it. 7 names of people who were doing nothing, should not have had this happen to them. I know this is controversial and a lot of people don't like to hear this, but Breonna Taylor did not deserve to die in that way. Yes, her ex-boyfriend was a drug dealer. She was possibly involved, but that was the most horrible accident ever. Her new boyfriend shot at the police. They returned fire. She was caught in the middle. A horrible accident. She didn't deserve that. And I know a lot of people are probably wondering why George Floyd's name wasn't mentioned in those 8 people. George Floyd's name is in this 27, but George Floyd died of a drug overdose. There were others who were actually experiencing excited delirium. Lionel Morris, Manny Ellis, what was her name? Tina Davis, Kendrell Watkins. Now, when they were in police custody, they were already acting erratic, and a few of them got tased, and just their hearts couldn't keep up. And their deaths were still ruled unarmed. Even though they were fighting the police and the police restrained them, they died in police custody. So they're in the 27. Kenesha Fuller is also on this list, who was killed by Officer Alfreda Fluker. This tragedy gets even worse when you find out that the 2 were ex-lovers. Officer Fuller was off duty and went to go kill her ex-lover when she found out that Miss Fuller had been dating a new man. Officer Fuller also shot that other man, but he didn't die. I did not include her in the 8 because Officer Fuller was off duty going to kill this woman because she was a scorned lover. It wouldn't have mattered her profession. There's another on the list, Joaquin Light, who was running from the police, ran into an Officer Pollock, who dropped his gun. The gun discharged, striking Mr. Light in the abdomen. They tried to save him, couldn't stop it. So now we have a new number, 7. 7 black people who were unjustly killed by the police. Now, for me personally, one innocent black person, let alone one innocent person of any color, creed, orientation, whatever, is one too many. But when you are trying to push a narrative that black people are just being senselessly gunned in the streets, you're using the biggest numbers you can find, as opposed to breaking down, finding out what actually happened. It's not right. So now that number 7 doesn't really seem so big against the big picture. And what's the big picture? I got you. Do you know how many black people were actually arrested last year? There's no way to know the exact number of arrests made per year, but they can estimate. So if you use the Department of Justice website, it'll tell you in 2019, a little over 10 million arrests were made. But 2020 is a high crime year, riots, etc. So they're actually estimating closer to 14 million arrests were made in 2020. If we use that number, it looks like more like 4.4 million black people will be arrested in 2020. But if I divide 7 by 4.4 million people arrested, what kind of percentage am I going to get? The answer? 0.000159. So you mean to tell me, as a criminal, I have a 0.000159% chance of being killed by the police? But what percentage is that of the black community? Not just the criminals, but the black community. That is 0.0000016%. So you mean to tell me that if I'm a black person in America and I'm a criminal, I have less than 1% chance to be killed by the police. But if I'm innocent, my chances are even lower of being killed by the police. But that's not what the media is portraying. So why would they do that? It's actually really simple. It's about controlling votes. The party that controls the votes controls the government. Republicans want control and power as well, but the Democrats are masters at deception. If it were not for racism and oppression, they wouldn't have a leg to stand on. So think about that. If racism and oppression are their biggest selling points, why would they want to get rid of it? The answer's simple. They don't. So of course they're going to fan the flames of racism. Of course they're going to tell you that you're oppressed. But don't worry, we're the government. We're here to help. I'm pretty sure Ronald Reagan had something to say about that. Now in this video, we were only talking about killing, not police brutality. The reason why police brutality is a little bit trickier. You have to be able to tell who's lying, who's not, if this claim is valid, or if they're just trying to avoid charges. It's hard to do. I can tell you this, in the cases where there was a body cam or somebody was filming, the claims of police brutality have been greatly decreased. Why is that? Is that because the police are having to be more accountable? Or is it because citizens or people being arrested have to be more accountable for their actions? Who knows? I will say this in closing. Police have a hazardous, thankless job to uphold law and order and protect citizens, a lot of which don't even have respect for them anymore. It's almost like back in the day, people would tell you, you do 100 things good, nobody even talk about it. You do one thing bad, just one, they'll never let you forget it. Just a thought.